That night was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. A perfect engagement party held in my parents' house, surrounded by everyone I loved. Trevor, my fiancé, was at the center of attention, smiling as he graciously accepted the congratulations. And yet, there was this uneasy feeling creeping under my skin. I kept telling myself it was just the nerves, but my eyes couldn't stop drifting toward Trevor. Every few minutes, he glanced down at his phone, his expression momentarily clouded with worry, a flicker so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But I did. I also noticed Clara, my sister, standing alone in the corner. She wasn't smiling the way she usually did at family gatherings. Her eyes were fixed on Trevor, sharp and tense, with not a single trace of joy. The uneasiness refused to leave me alone. Not long after, I saw Clara subtly gesture for Trevor to follow her toward the hallway behind the dining room. I told myself it was none of my business, but my feet moved anyway, as if pulled by an invisible thread. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I hid behind the wall near them. I couldn't catch every word, but fragments of the conversation reached me enough to send a shiver crawling down my spine. Too dangerous. Evidence! It was Clara's voice. Evidence. What evidence? What were they talking about? I couldn't take it anymore. I circled around to the other side of the hallway, determined to confront Trevor and demand an explanation. And then I saw it. For a full second, my brain simply shut down. Right in front of me, Trevor had Clara pressed against the wall, his hands gripping her arms. They were kissing. All the sounds from the party, music, laughter, chatter, faded into a dull ringing in my ears. My body felt like every breath had been vacuumed out of my lungs. And then Clara's eyes met mine over Trevor's shoulder. What I saw there wasn't triumph or guilt. It was panic raw. Desperate panic, as if she wanted to scream something at me, but couldn't. Trevor spun around, startled. The brief flash of shock on his face was instantly replaced by a cold, razor-edged fury. But that fury wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed straight at Clara, like a silent death threat. That moment snapped me out of my paralysis. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I simply stepped backward, slowly at first, then faster, like a wounded animal retreating to survive. I needed to get out. Right now. I turned and walked, then walked faster, then ran. I rushed past the cheerful faces of the guests without recognizing anyone, as if I were underwater. It wasn't until the freezing night air slammed into my face that I realized I was outside. I stumbled into my car, slammed the door shut, and collapsed forward onto the steering wheel, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. That night, I thought I was running away from a simple, blatant betrayal. But the truth was far worse. I was running from something much darker, much more complicated. A truth I wasn't ready to face yet. I ran. I moved to Seattle, a city where no one knew my name, and buried myself in work. Interior design had rules. Straight lines had to stay parallel. Angles had to be square. Everything could be measured and controlled. It was the kind of order my life no longer had. I lived day by day in a controlled state of numbness. I worked. I ate dinner alone. I tried not to think. Calls from my parents? I replied with short, clipped text messages. Calls from Clara? I ignored. Every time her name appeared on my screen, that hallway scene replayed in my head, sharp as a shard of glass twisting into memory. The pain didn't vanish, it simply settled, like a constant hum buzzing faintly at the back of my mind. It took months for my life to regain any kind of rhythm, even if it was mechanical and monotonous. I worked, went home, and avoided any unnecessary social connection. That was when I met Damien. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't someone I bumped into at a bar. He was a client, a man who hired me to redesign his company's office. Our first meetings were strictly professional. Materials, layouts, budgets. I kept my walls high and strong, and I had no intention of letting anyone pass them. But Damien was different. He didn't try to tear those walls down. He simply stood outside them, respecting their existence. He listened, genuinely listened to my ideas without crossing boundaries. He never asked personal questions. He never gave empty compliments. And, paradoxically, that was exactly what made me feel safe. Gradually, our meetings began to stretch a little longer, with brief digressions into books or movies we both enjoyed. Then one day, at the end of a meeting, he asked casually, "Do you have plans for the weekend?" My first reflex was to lie to say I was busy. That was the safe answer. But there was something so earnest in his tone that I paused. I looked at him, a calm man who had spent weeks working alongside me, without ever once making me feel uneasy. "I don't have any plans yet," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest warmth seep into me, breaking through the constant vigilance. Our relationship didn't start with lightning bolts or fireworks. It began with a conversation, then a coffee, then dinner. It was built on patience and the sense of safety. He gave me something far more valuable than passion. Damien wasn't the man who pulled me out of the wreckage. He was the one who simply sat beside me and waited until I was ready to stand up on my own. The peace I found beside Damien was what inadvertently allowed the undertow of the past to resurface. When you no longer have to fight just to survive another day, your mind finally has time to look back. One evening, scrolling through news headlines, one title slammed into me: InvestCorp Scandal. Hundreds of investors wiped out, large-scale fraud suspected. That name, InvestCorp. My chest tightened. A hazy memory surfaced, Trevor bragging about a can't-lose opportunity. My first reaction was violent denial. I slammed the tab closed instantly. I didn't want to know. I didn't want any thread connecting my present to that past. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Weeks later, while searching for an old contract, I had to dig through an external hard drive I had brought with me from that previous life. A digital box stuffed with memories I'd tried so hard not to touch. While scrolling through folders, I accidentally clicked one labeled Cayman Trip 2021. That was the trip Trevor said was strictly for work. A morbid mix of fear and curiosity pushed me to open it. Amidst the photos of beaches and sunsets, there was one picture: Trevor having dinner with a group of men. And behind them, barely legible on the blurry signboard, were the words, InvestCorp Annual Conference. My whole body went cold. He had lied. This wasn't just a coincidence. The name I had tried to ignore was back, and it was screaming at me now. That night, I sat in front of my laptop, not with the focus of a skilled investigator, but with the trembling hands of someone forced to confront a truth she had desperately avoided. I opened the old email account Trevor and I once shared. I wasn't methodical. I just typed his name in the search bar and scrolled aimlessly, as if watching a horror movie where I already knew the ending. Most of it was meaningless junk, until I saw it, an email Trevor had sent to himself, probably just to save the file. Subject: Logo Concept, Project C. I clicked on the attachment. It was a draft logo for a consulting company. A logo I had helped Trevor refine last year, when he had casually told me it was just a side project for fun. The company's name was identical to one of the shell corporations mentioned in the InvestCorp scandal article. A wave of nausea surged up my throat. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. I had unknowingly become part of his con. Trevor had used me, used my creativity, to contribute to his fraud. The heartbreak of betrayal was suddenly eclipsed by something else, something far more humiliating and revolting: the crushing realization of being a fool. The anger that began to rise in me wasn't fiery and explosive. It was cold, controlled, razor sharp. I couldn't sit quietly in Seattle, pretending the past was dead. It wasn't dead. It was alive, breathing, and possibly still destroying lives. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call Damien, to pour everything out, to seek comfort. But I stopped. What did I really know about Damien, aside from his kindness and patience? I had made the mistake of putting blind faith in a man once. I wasn't going to do it again. This was my mess. I had to clean it up myself. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't been able to look at for months. Clara. Axo. For the first time, it didn't trigger a stabbing pain. Instead, a single question burned inside me. Clara's panicked eyes in that hallway. Trevor's silent threat. What did she know? What had she been trying to tell me? Then I thought of my parents. My father's phone call the night I left. Trevor explained everything. It was just a misunderstanding. They had chosen to believe him. For pride? Or for something else? I remembered Trevor enthusiastically pitching my father on a golden investment opportunity. And then an even more disturbing thought hit me. This wasn't just about me. It was bigger. Much bigger. I couldn't keep running. I opened the airline website and booked the earliest flight back home the next morning. I wasn't going back to reconcile. I wasn't going back to cry. I was going back for answers. And this time, I wouldn't believe a single word anyone said, only what I uncovered with my own hands. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I only called my mother on Saturday morning and said, "I'll be home for dinner tonight. I'm bringing a friend." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear everything she wasn't saying. Finally, my mother, forever obsessed with preserving the image of a perfect family, replied, "That's wonderful, dear. We'll be so happy to see you." But her voice carried an edge of tension she couldn't hide. When Damien and I stepped through the door that evening, I understood why, instantly. Trevor was there, sitting comfortably in the armchair of my parents' living room, as if he had never left. When he saw me, he stood, attempting a smile that looked forced and ugly. "Cassidy, you're back." The blood in my veins froze solid. They had orchestrated this. They hadn't invited me back to listen. They had brought me back to fix things, to force me into a fake reconciliation. At that moment, I felt Damien's hand squeeze mine gently under the table. It was firm, grounding, a quiet reminder. "You're not alone. You're not the same girl who ran away that night." Then I saw Clara. She sat apart from everyone else, in a single chair near the window, almost invisible. She gave me a brief nod, her face impassive. But when her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, I caught something complex there, something I couldn't quite name. Dinner was pure psychological torture. The air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. My parents desperately tried to steer the conversation toward harmless topics. The weather, my work in Seattle, a neighbor who had just sold their house. No one dared mention the elephant sitting right there in the room. Trevor barely touched his food. He kept glancing down at his phone under the table, and each time he did, his face grew a shade paler. He looked like an animal cornered, searching for an escape. And then it was Clara who lit the fuse. Not with an overt attack, just with a seemingly casual remark, tossed into the silence like a stone into still water. "I've been reading about financial scandals lately. It's scary how money just disappears into tax havens like the Cayman Islands. Hard to believe, isn't it?" Trevor's fork froze midair. He looked up sharply at Clara, his eyes shooting a silent warning. My father, likely trying to cut through the tension, chuckled awkwardly and said, "All crooks. No honest businessman needs to hide money there." Clara smirked faintly, almost imperceptibly, and turned to Trevor. "Isn't that right, Trevor? You're the expert here. You must know all about these things." It was a perfect strike, innocent enough to be unassailable, but aimed directly at his jugular. Trevor's face went pale. He snapped, "Shut up!" His voice was low and sharp, almost a hiss. "You don't know what you're talking about." Everyone froze. My mother stammered, "Trevor, honey, don't you play innocent?" Trevor continued, pointing a trembling finger at Clara, panic shoving away every last bit of composure. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Those contracts. That fund. It should have been untraceable." He had blurted it out. That fund. Untraceable contracts. My father's face went slack, color draining from it. "What fund? Trevor, what the hell are you talking about?" But it was too late. Trevor realized what he had just confessed. His eyes widened, panic turning feral. He shoved his chair back violently and bolted for the door. "I have to go." In the chaos, while my parents sat frozen in disbelief, Clara quietly set her fork down, stood, and followed him out. My heart was pounding. This was it. The answer. I shot to my feet, ignoring my parents' voices calling after me, gave Damien a reassuring nod, and rushed out into the garden behind them. The icy night air hit my face, but couldn't calm the storm in my chest. Under the dim glow of the garden lights, I saw Trevor pacing like a caged animal, his perfectly groomed hair now a mess as his hands clawed through it. Clara stood opposite him, arms crossed, her face carved from stone. "You're insane!" Trevor snarled, his voice thick with rage. "You ruined everything! Everything!" "I ruined it?" Clara let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You destroyed it yourself, Trevor, the moment you signed your first fake contract." Trevor spun around, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare blame me! You seduced me into this." "Enough!" My voice cut through, trembling but resolute. Both of them whipped around, startled. Trevor looked like he had seen a ghost. "Cassidy, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, then shot Clara a venomous glare before turning and disappearing into the darkness beyond the trees. And just like that, it was only me and Clara. Silence thickened the air between us. Months of anger, pain, and confusion swelled, ready to burst. What the hell is going on, Clara? My voice cracked. That night in the hallway, and now this? You owe me an explanation. Clara didn't look at me. She stared into the distance, exhaling as if releasing a weight she'd carried far too long. You're right, she said, her tone weary. That night in the hallway, you think I wanted to do that? You think I enjoyed having to touch him? She finally turned, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion etched deep in her eyes. He was going after Mom and Dad's retirement fund, Cassidy. Their entire life savings. He planned to drain it right after marrying you and then fabricate evidence to pin it all on me. My head buzzed with disbelief. How? How do you know that? I suspected him for a long time, Clara said evenly. The too perfect facade. The too good promises they didn't add up. I found a ledger he'd hidden in his study, and encrypted messages on a second phone. I tried to warn Mom and Dad. She let out a bitter laugh. But they didn't believe me. Their golden son-in-law had them blinded. They said I was jealous. They told me to shut up for the sake of family reputation. And suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. My father's phone call. My mother's silence. They hadn't been unaware. They had chosen not to believe. So, that night, I faltered. I had no choice, Clara cut in, her voice breaking. I knew you'd never believe me. You loved him too blindly. I had to make you hate him. I had to make you walk away, whatever it cost me. I'm sorry, Cassidy. I am so sorry I hurt you. But there was no other way. I stood frozen, trying to breathe. The betrayal I had carried like a knife in my chest for months turned out to be an act of brutal, selfless protection. Clara stepped closer, pulled something from her coat pocket, and pressed it into my hand, a small USB drive. Her palm was ice cold. Everything's on here, she murmured. Emails, offshore bank statements, the entire fraud plan, and recordings of my conversations with him. Evidence I paid a heavy price to get. She met my eyes squarely. I've done my part. The rest is up to you. I stood there in the frigid garden, the tiny USB in my hand feeling as heavy as a brick. Clara walked away, leaving me alone with the truth that had finally been laid bare. I walked back inside, not glancing at the dining room where my parents sat in suffocating silence. Damien was waiting in the hall, his expression tight with concern. I couldn't speak. I just held out the USB to him. He looked at it, then at me, and something in his gaze told me he understood everything. Let's go, he said quietly, draping an arm over my shoulders as he guided me to the car. That night, in Damien's apartment, I curled into a blanket on the sofa while he plugged the USB into his laptop. I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen. I just listened to the steady clicks of his mouse and his occasional heavy sighs. After what felt like hours, he spoke, his voice low but weighted with certainty. Cassidy, everything here. It matches exactly what I've been investigating. I lifted my head, startled. Investigating? Damien nodded, his eyes shadowed with sadness. My family was one of InvestCorp's victims too. I've been gathering evidence against Trevor for over a year. He paused, then continued quietly. That's why I approached you at first. I'm sorry. Another revelation. Another shock. But strangely, I didn't feel betrayed. What I felt was connection, two wounds intersecting. Do you have enough now? I asked, my voice rough. With what Clara gave you, Damien said, closing the laptop, we have more than enough. 2 days later, everything detonated. Damien turned all of the evidence over to the authorities. The news exploded across every channel. Trevor Fiancé, key player in InvestCorp fraud, wanted for arrest. Trevor was eventually caught in a South American country after months on the run. A small portion of the stolen money was recovered, but for most victims, including Damien's family, it was little more than a consolation prize. With all of this finally out, I drove back to my parents' house. They were sitting in the living room, the television off, the air heavy with a silence that spoke volumes. I didn't sit down. I just stood there. Why? I asked. A single word. But it carried the weight of months of pain. My father avoided my gaze. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. You knew, didn't you? My voice was cold, stripped of emotion. You knew Clara warned you. You knew something was wrong. We didn't know it would get this bad, my mother whispered. Didn't know or didn't want to know. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Clara told me how you ignored her, how you shut her down. My father finally spoke, his tone weary, defeated. Clara, she's always been hard on Trevor. We just thought she was jealous. And Trevor, he was persuasive. He talked about the family's reputation, about giving you a good life. That's it? I stared at him. Just reputation? He was silent for a long time. Then he muttered, almost inaudibly. He mentioned an investment. A small part of the InvestCorp fund. He promised good returns. And there it was. The final truth. Ugly and naked. So you sold out both your daughters, I said, my voice frighteningly calm. Silenced one. Threw the other to the wolves. All for reputation and a little profit. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned, walked out, and closed the door behind me, not just on that house, but on an entire. The Seattle sky was unusually clear that day. I stood on a balcony, still smelling faintly of fresh paint, looking out over the city. This was the first apartment Damien and I had designed and owned together. The legal battle with Trevor and InvestCorp was over. Justice had been served, but scars remained. My relationship with my parents was still distant, limited to polite holiday calls. But with Clara, things were different. We spoke every week now, sharing small pieces of our lives, slowly rebuilding what had been shattered. Damien stepped out onto the balcony, wrapping his arms around me from behind and pressing a soft kiss to my hair. What are you thinking about? About last year, I replied, leaning my head on his shoulder. I thought I'd never trust anyone again. He turned me around, his steady, warm gaze meeting mine. You don't need to trust me, he said seriously. You just need to trust yourself, your judgment, your strength to get through anything. I'm just here to walk beside you. And that was the difference. Our love wasn't a whirlwind sweeping me off my feet. It wasn't a shelter for me to hide from the world. It was a safe space where we could both be ourselves, scars and all. Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. I know you've walked a very dark road, he said, his voice steady but trembling slightly. I can't promise the road ahead will always be smooth, but I can promise I'll walk beside you, no matter what. Cassidy Moore, will you build a home with me, not just of bricks and mortar, but of trust and honesty? Tears streamed down my face, but this time, they were tears of joy. Yes, I whispered. He slid the ring onto my finger. It wasn't a flashy diamond. It was a deep, clear, sapphire quiet, steadfast, just like our love. We stood there, holding each other, watching as the city lights flickered to life. The painting of my life was no longer perfect like I once imagined. It had cracks, shadows, dark stains, but those cracks were exactly what allowed the light to shine through, and for the first time, I saw it as truly beautiful.